Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm working on this 3300 watt DuroStar generator. Now this machine, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to Jason. He's a local guy who buys and sells equipment. He found this one essentially at the dump. He paid the scrap price of only $20. Now, neither of us have tried to start it, so potentially it just runs and there's nothing wrong with it. Given that it was at the dump, I'm leaning towards that there is something wrong with it. And I've checked it over just a bit. I took a peek in the tank. It is dry. We don't have any rust. And the engine, it turns over. And we have compression. So those are both good signs. Potentially this doesn't need much, but that's what we're going to find out. So let me get set up a little bit better and get going on this. See what we have for oil. Yeah, plenty of oil. Needs to be changed, but we'll worry about that later. I noticed we have a little bit of fuel in the tank, so that should be drained out. We'll worry about that in a bit, but I'm curious to see what, if anything, is in the carb. Yeah, not terrible. I mean, there is some debris. There is no water. The smell, though, is really bad. So I would say it's been some time since this machine has been run. And if you look at the drain bolt, there is varnish or rust on it. And that's usually a pretty good indicator of the condition of the carb. So I would say for sure we have carb issues, and this carb most likely has to be cleaned or replaced. That said, I do want to hear the engine run first, make sure it sounds good, and we're making power. Let's start by getting the fuel line off. This is where we'll feed the fuel. And I'm also going to take the airbox cover off. We are missing some hardware. Looks like there was a little damage on the frame. And because of that, we don't have a lot of clearance to get the airbox off, but it looks like we might have enough. And we have no air filter. So yeah, not a good sign. We also have a crack in the back of the airbox. So at a minimum, we need a new airbox, a new air filter, and a cleaned carb, or most likely a new carb. All right, let's see if this carb is going to accept any fuel. And that would be a no. This tube immediately filled up, and the carb was empty. We just pulled the bolt. The carb was 100% empty, so it should have taken a lot of fuel, and it took nothing. All it did was fill this line up. So yeah, carb has issues. The needle is stuck. So let's get the spark plug out. We'll just feed some fuel directly in the cylinder and try to get it running that way just for a second. It looks like we have a brand new plug. It's an NGK BPR7ES. So yeah, someone was trying to get it to run. Let's check that gap. Yeah, seems to be good. So we'll give it just a bit of fuel. So we'll turn the circuit breaker on. I've also plugged in a light and it's turned on. So yeah, if it runs long enough and the engine gets up to speed, hopefully that light will turn on. Nice. Very nice. The engine sounds good and we're making power. So this should be an easy fix. I mean, we just need to clean the carb or potentially get a new one. You know, these clone carbs, they are dirt cheap, about $15, and they usually run quite well. So we'll get the carb cleaned up. We'll see if it'll come back. If not, we'll get another. Obviously, we need a new air box, and I discovered another issue here. This fuel valve, although it's turned off, it is continually dripping. And that may have been the issue that ultimately did this carb in. So, you know, even if the previous owner had run the carb dry and shut the fuel off, that issue would have kept that carburetor full. And yeah, may have led to it being thrown away ultimately. So let's get the fuel out of the tank. There's not a lot in there. And I think I have a valve that'll just fit right on there. So we don't need to order anything there. So let's get that taken care of, maybe get the oil changed. We'll place an order, get those parts installed, and hopefully we'll have a good running machine at that point. Yeah, not much in that tank. So I'm just going to remove the screws on the tank. Maybe I'll tilt it a bit, just try to get a little more out. And then we'll get this valve replaced. With the fuel valve removed, it's a lot easier to drain out what remains in the tank. Plus, if there's any debris, the fuel filter has been removed, so it should flush that right out. I guess the good thing you can say about the Honda clones is that things are pretty standardized. Whether you're talking a Predator, a DuroStar, a Generac, you know, the tanks have usually one of two fittings. One like this, if I can get it out of the package, where it threads into the tank, and the one like this tank here, where you actually have the external threads. So this valve here should fit. Comes with a new fuel filter, so that usually goes in first. And then you just tighten down. And that's it. So this is going to make a bit of a mess. The drain bolt, it is right above the rail. So I'm going to grab the Forma funnel. We'll try to guide it over the rail into the pan. No, that's not going to work. Yeah, something like that. All right, I'm just going to start by getting the fuel line off. And I'm going to go on record as saying this one may not be savable. The smell coming from this carburetor is really kind of overwhelming. And the fact that we had some water in the fuel too is not a good thing, because if it rusted up in here, you know, the ultrasonic isn't going to fix that. Yeah, not looking good. Actually, I've seen a lot worse. So I give this one some hope. Needle actually isn't stuck. So that's a good sign. Let's see if the main jet will come out of there. Nope. Yeah, surprisingly, everything came apart that needs to come apart. And the inside of the carb, the main body, actually looks pretty good. You know, the bowl, there might be a bit of rust in there, a lot of varnish. I think that'll clean up. And the needle doesn't look bad. So I'm kind of wondering now why we didn't get any fuel flow. You know, there might be a clog right there. So let me just grab some carb spray. We'll spray in there, see if we have an obstruction. Yeah, that is blocked solid. Nothing's getting through. So let me try it from this direction. Yeah, and we're getting nothing. So I am thinking a small drill bit to kind of twist in there should clear the clog. And it also, because it's that spiral on the drill bit, it'll kind of dig it out and pull it out. And then we can use carb cleaner to get the rest of it. There we go. Just broke through. Okay, perfect. I'm just going to run through everything with a wire, make sure there's no other blockages, and we'll probably attack this with a wire brush. Just try to break up as much of it as possible before soaking it in the ultrasonic. Main jet, it is plugged solid. Pilot jet was also plugged. So this thing really had no chance of running. It should run now. So while that carb is marinating, I just wanted to show you the oil real quick. You know, although it's well used, it looks pretty good. There's no metallic in there, no chunks of metal, so I would say we do have a healthy engine. As far as the fuel goes, yeah, not much came out, and surprisingly it looks a lot better than it smells. Now, the thing I was concerned about is that there is a little water. You can just see it right there on the bottom. And it doesn't take much to rust out a carb or a tank. You know, thankfully I think that carb is going to be viable, and the tank looks pretty good as well. Yeah, I've got to say, it cleaned up really well. I mean, it looks like new. Almost. Anyway, let's get this back together. And I will say, it is hard to justify cleaning a carb like this. They do sell on Amazon for about $10. So, yeah, if you're trying to run a business and, you know, time is money, in this case, I would say just buy a new carb. Now, if it's an OEM engine, like a Briggs, Yamaha, Honda, then it is worthwhile trying to save that carb, because a new OEM carb often costs close to $100. You know, so in that case, it might be worth spending an hour of your time cleaning up the OEM carb, because a lot of the clone carbs for name brand engines do not run the engine very well. So I'll get the pilot in, make sure it goes all the way down, like that. And then we'll put the idle set screw in, which, you know, this generator doesn't idle, so you don't really want to drive the screw in too far. The main purpose of it is just to put some pressure on that pilot jet. So just bring it in until about 2 threads poke through, and that's all you need. Oh, almost forgot the O-ring. Let's try it out. I am going to leave the air box off since there's no air filter and we need a new one. So the carb could run a little bit lean and might have a slight surge. Usually that's not the case. I guess we'll find out. All right, it is taking fuel. So let's see if that needle will shut the flow off. Beautiful. Needle is working. So let's try to start it. Okay, let's give this a try. I've got a light plugged in and turned on, as well as the kilowatt. So I have enough fuel in that carb to run it for about 30 seconds. And that should be enough time to see how the carb is running the engine. And we'll also double check the output on the kilowatt. Ignition on, choke on. Okay, well that was pretty much perfect. It started first pull. I was able to turn the choke off right away and the engine ran smooth. The outputs were also dead on at 120.7 volts and 60.7 hertz. So yeah, not too bad. Anyway, the engine did start to surge a bit. So I topped off the fuel and the surge went away. So I think that carb is a survivor. So I'm going to place an order for that air box. We'll get that installed, get the tank put back on, and get this thing outside, put it under load, and see how it performs. All right, I've got the new air box. This one I got off of eBay. It was $18.50. Now, this was advertised for a Predator generator, and I didn't even look for one for DuroStar because quite honestly, it doesn't matter. Both this and the Predator and quite a few others, they are just Honda clones. And if you get an air box for a similar sized Honda clone, you know, in the case for Predator, it's 212 cc's. And this one, I don't think it actually says the cc's on here, but it does say 7 horsepower, which is in the same class. So, you know, I think this will be fine. The old Airbox 2 did have a number on it. It says 168F. And a lot of Honda clones do have these numbers, which basically indicate what type of clone it is. And if you look on this airbox, it does say 168F as well as 170F. So yeah, this one should fit. You know, I guess the bigger question is, will it fit between the carb and the rail? You know, that's the wild card here. So let's give it a try. And you want to be sure to plumb up the new fuel line. So once you have the airbox on, it's not that easy. Yeah, perfect. I guess we should try the cover before we commit. Perfect. So, no issues with the airbox. So let's get both of these nuts torqued down to about 60 inch-pounds. And these foam filters, they do need a bit of oil. And don't be afraid to use a lot, because you're just going to work it in. And then you use a towel to squeeze out the excess. And paper filters you don't oil, but foam filters, they do need oil to work properly. So we are all fueled up and ready to go. I've got 3,000 watts of load on standby. Now, this machine's rated at 3,300 watts. It'll be interesting to see how it handles the 3,000 watts. I've had a lot of issues in the past, not particularly with this brand, but with this size engine. This is a Honda clone, kind of in the 6.5 to 7 horse range. A lot of times they struggle to reach 3,000 watts, never mind the rated load, which in this case is 3,300. So the plan is, we'll get it started, let it warm up a bit, we'll double check the outputs, and then we'll put 1,500 watts of load on, see how it does, and then bring it up to 3,000. For something that was thrown away, it's running quite well. It is starting consistently the first pull, and it had no issues pulling 3000 watts. The engine speed was holding close to 59 Hertz, and the voltage wasn't bad either. We started at 118 volts and under 3000 watts. It actually was a little higher at 119 volts. So on that front, we're doing pretty good. You know, as far as the sine wave and the THD, yeah, this one is probably one of the worst I've tested. The THD and the sine wave actually looked good at no load, and then when I put 1500 watts on, things went downhill quickly. The sine wave became quite a mess. The distortion jumped to 27%, and then I brought it up to 3000 watts, and the distortion increased even further to 31%. So yeah, not great for sensitive electronics. And yeah, if you have sensitive electronics, this would not be my first choice. That said, it is running the way it's designed, and it's running quite well. So I would say far from trash. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.